Alright, ladies and gentlemen, today I want to try to do something a little bit new. I'm recording a video off stream to talk about the end of the Season 8 kind of run. And so before I talked about the state of the game, where I talked about my feelings in the game and how I didn't really enjoy it as much due to a bunch of different reasons. And I wanted to make kind of a wrap-up video kind of talking about my current opinion on the state of the game, as well as answering some of the questions that were problems beforehand, as well as looking toward future preseason stuff, and what I want to see or what I would think would be better for the game. Let's just start with the obvious stuff that everyone knows already. I ended the season at Diamond, and a lot of people are going to make a lot of excuses or say it's for a lot of different reasons, and I want to say I ended Diamond because of poor play and nothing else. A lot of people recommended meta picks, and I don't think that would have helped. Maybe I would have gotten a higher rating, but I always have played the game in the same way. I like playing certain picks, many of which are off meta, and I prefer personally to win with these picks than I enjoy playing with other picks. I kind of, to attach to this statement, I think this is the worst season ever to possibly try off meta stuff. I think that this is a really, I guess, tight-knit meta, and you can't really break into it. If you don't play the meta picks, you are actively hurting yourself at the end of the season. So for multiple roles, not just mid lane, I think mid, top, and jungle had a big lock on the meta, and they were the three strongest roles, on top of the fact that the meta picks were so oppressive that you couldn't pick anything into them. And if you're curious about the meta picks, for mid lane, it's Aatrox, Aurelia, Kali, LeBlanc. These four picks kind of crowd out every other pick in the game, to the point where when people ask me, hey Scarra, what do you think about this pick, I ask them, can it be any of these four? If the answer is yes, then it's playable. If it's not, then don't bother. For top lane, it's stuff like Victor, Sion, Urgot, Aatrox, and to some extent Rumble. I think Rumble showed up at the very end of the season. People didn't really expect him to be there. I think he's actually like super OP right now, but people didn't really play him. If you can't play into any of these five picks, well, I know you can't play into any of these five picks. They're like super OP. Maybe they have a bit more variable in terms of their variance in their counter picks, but for the most part, it's kind of the same thing as mid lane. And in jungle, you're playing like what, Camille, Xin Zhao, Talia every game. And a lot of the reasons why this meta was so prominent was because of the stuff that I had problems with in my last video. I think before we get any further, let's try to keep the video talk to what happened from mid-season to end season, because my last video kind of covered like what happened beforehand to the mid-season. I kind of want to just focus on the end of the season and the most recent changes. So ever since they kind of added scuttle crabs into the game has been very focused on like obtaining these. And the way jungles kind of work around these is that, like, you know, essentially if you're not playing a winning lane, you're not benefiting your team. And the roles in particular are the ones that the champions that I listed are ones that are incredibly good early game and have good pressure and have like a lot of other variables to them, whether they're great assassins, whether they're great bruisers, whether they just do a ton of damage, a ton of CC. And so they're just really strong, and so strong to the point where not only is the meta so reliant on picks like these, it's also very snowball. So this is a meta where like one or two deaths could cause one champion or one character or one lane to kind of roll over the rest. And so this is like a really poor meta to try anything else that was off meta. I personally played a lot of Lissandra this meta. It tends to do well into picks like Aatrox, Aurelia, Kali, and LeBlanc. A lot of people wonder like, why did Lissandra show up in this meta when she wasn't buffed or any of that? And the reason is because all of her counter picks, champions that are control mages that have greater range than her, stuff like Orianna, stuff like Cassio, stuff like even stuff like Vel'Koz, are because these picks are unplayable into the 4 meta picks. And so because of that, since she countered or could lane against all 4 of them, she was very strong in the current state of the game, as well as, you know, flex pickable. But back to the meta at hand, I think that this was a really tough situation for a player such as me to be able to play how he wanted. And I think on top of the fact that I spent a lot of the season kind of depressed with not only like my success, like I'm not very happy ending Diamond, but for me it's like, you know what, I'll get over it and next season will be better. Actually, But for a lot of the season, like my inability to play the game frustrated me, and it showed on stream. I was really, I guess maybe a little bit cranky, but it was just really sad watching my stream a lot. And I think that like toward the end of the season, definitely toward my grind, I was able to kind of reset my mental and go from there. I think I'm in a lot better place now, but beforehand, like it was hard for me to recognize what made the season so poor for me. And it wasn't until like, I read Apto's kind of analysis on the meta, as well as talked to a lot of other people and kind of reflected on it myself, that I realized like, oh, this is why it's so bad for me, and this is why I'm not enjoying it as much. Let's talk into the problems I had with the last video. So in the last video, I talked about how like the game was too damage heavy, that there was not much finesse in being able to play the game. It went a lot less from like these kind of slow-paced games to these explosive, fast-paced games. One, I still think that's the case. I still think this game kind of is in the same state that I talked about before, with a little bit less damage, which, to be honest, a better thing. Another thing that was a big problem in my last video was the negativity in the game. Honestly, there's still a lot. I think that it's kind of doubled by the fact, or tripled, I guess, by the fact that I'm playing in relatively low elo, considering what I've been playing at for the last couple of years. I think in higher elos, people tend to be a lot less chill, or recognize me more, but I think generally speaking, toward the end of my climb, I was averaging a person who was flaming me once every 4 games. I don't necessarily know if this is a high or a low point. This is just generally the average. I do, however, think that a lot of negativity in the game came from Riot's failures throughout the year, whether it's from Clash, whether it's from promises that were broken before. However, I think as Worlds kind of wrapped up, Worlds as well as stuff like KDA kind of invigorated people to really want to play League. And I think that helps out a lot. Like, I think Riot spent a ton of money this season making advertisements and all of that, and all of that put together was worth like C9's run, at Worlds, or worth their KDA video, which is just stellar, and this is a good transition point to talk about the impact of NA doing well at Worlds. So I think of all the regions, NA tends to be like the region that needs the most help in terms of population, in terms of just people playing ranked more. And I think that NA doing well at Worlds directly promotes interest in playing the game, especially in NA. And I think that I'd hope that this has happened. If NA had made finals, it would have been a bigger deal. But I think that C9 at least going to semis was a great thing. And I think on top of the meta that was at Worlds, although the meta may not be enjoyable for me to play as a casual player, I think as a viewer experience, it was really enjoyable to watch. And I think for all Riot's like criteria, they could say, this Worlds was a big success. They wish it wasn't like 2-3-0s in the last 2 best of 5s, right? Moving on, let's move toward the preseason. I think that preseason is kind of really interesting. Let's loop back here on the runes. And I think that runes is a really big thing for me. So in the last video, I talked about how runes should be deleted. I still agree. I think that they spent a year trying to balance runes. They still don't have it perfect. I don't like Conquer in the current state. I think it's OP in a lot of different champions, namely Aurelia, some other champions, right? I think it does really well on Tryndamere, for instance. I think that the way that runes work, and this is the funniest way to see runes, is that runes are just cyclical. I tell you there's too much damage in the game, and what happens? Riot agrees. They nerf damage runes, so they nerf Scorch, they nerf Airy. Cool. Now what happens? Well, the runes that were there to prevent this, Bone Plating, Grasp, and Aftershock, are now the best runes. And okay, well now like they have to nerf these runes. Well then, the runes that are utility runes but didn't see play because early game runes were so strong, but now that are nerfed early game, like Glacial Augment as well as Spellbook, now start seeing a lot of play. And it's just kind of cyclical, like maybe we nerf this and maybe we nerf that. I find that it's the runes themselves are just super hard to balance, and after a year of runes reforged, they still don't have it done. I do, however, and this is a great statement for me to transition this into what they're going to do, which is they're making minor runes. Minor runes are just adding the old runes back. Let's be 100% real. If you look at minor runes, minor runes now have the ability to add resist back into the game. So let me get this straight. They spent a literal year balancing damage and resist in lane, early game, and now they're going to be spending another year balancing around the concept that 12 and Mara is back in the game. For instance, I think the armor is back in the game as well. To me, that's insane, or like that's relatively wild. They also spent a year where like not even a year, this is 2 years running where double pen on mages have been blatantly overpowered. And I talked about this when API optimization changes first happened. I said, look, they still haven't solved double pen. It still exists in the game, and it's like vital in every single build. And it's still the case. You know, you get your CDR item, you get double pen most of the times, and you get death cap afterwards, you get void. Nothing changes from that. And then they try to buff Leandries, but most of the time people are still taking double pen unless you're playing Rumble, for instance. And now they have to redo balance on AP pen items because champions can now have 12 more MR. So the buff they just put to Leandries might actually just be too soon. I just think that like it is crazy that they're maybe not crazy. I think it's very, very strange that they end up doing this. I think that what does happen in this situation is this similar to what happens when bone plating and corrupting potion were really strong, allowed off meta picks to be seen more. Picks that are able to survive lane against these super oppressive meta picks, and then potentially can squeeze out a kill here and there and start having impact in the game are more relevant. However, it comes at the cost of like variance in the lane, right? And I think at the moment, like I like being able to kind of smash my lane by 20 CS in the kill. And I think that like by opting to put in more MR into the game, especially, you're opting to go back into situations where like that may no longer be true. On top of the fact that the game is super early game focused, the fact that mid, specifically mid, needs to be able to work with the jungle to secure Scuttle Crab, a meta that I personally do not like very much. With all this being said, I think that runes are a big problem and something that they should be really worried about looking into. If they're gonna stick with the system, cool. I don't want the system to be in the game, but I can understand it might be better in the long run to have it. It's gonna be another balance nightmare. Like you're not gonna see a balance for another 6 months at the very least, and I think that that's kind of upsetting from someone who watched them do Runes Reforged for a year, and it felt like they learned like a decent amount from it. They nerfed Time Warp Tonic at the very end. It was kind of getting into a good state, and then this happens again, and now they have to redo it again. So I'm hoping that, you know, maybe they're more on the ball with changing stuff faster. The kind of silver lining of all this is they're removing stat decoupling with minor runes. God bless, really, really smart idea. Should never have been a thing in the first place. I think that it encourages you to just go like this really like thing that everyone else does, and while it still might do it now, you don't get punished for going things that are different, getting stats you don't even want in your character. The next thing, and the most important thing I want to talk about, is the fact that kind of all the problems I have with League right now are due to pacing, and I think that that's the biggest problem with the game. When I did Beyond the Rift with Saint Vicious, he came on the show and he was like, the problem is pacing. And the way I describe pacing is that you should think of a League of Legends game, a standard game of League of Legends, as having 3 phases: early game, mid game, and late game. Before, it used to be like late game was 3 items, 80 carries. If you wanted to play for a 3-item spike, you'd play Jinx, and you'd get like IE, Zeal item, and Last Whisper, and that would be your 3-item spike. Okay. However, nowadays, if you're not spiking at 1 item, you're not effective, and a lot of that is because of how important early game is and how accelerated late game is. And a good example is the way late game works right now in solo queue is Baron. So your early game is your laning. You get out of lane at like 8 minutes. You're rotating around to get towers. Your mid game is leading up to the Baron dance. So your mid game is like, you know, from 10 to 20 minutes, and your end game is just, can you get Baron? And if the answer is yes, you get Baron, you demolish a lane, the game's over. They can't play the game. Because Baron buff is so strong, Baron itself is relatively weak, and the game's over before you can even get to like a 3 items, or a lot of times like this game snowballs from a 2-item period. And so I think pacing is the biggest problem, and the biggest role that sees the biggest I should say the role that sees the biggest problem from this right now currently is AD carry, because AD carry is a role that's built around scaling off of items and not levels. They get less levels because they're dual lane, so the support and the AD function with less levels but scale very well with items. And the mid lane tends to be the one that scales well with levels, the solo lanes. and to some extent items. But in late, the AD should be the one that carries you kind of late game. The problem is late game comes and the game's over before AD carries are even relevant. Unless you're playing champions such as Lucian or Draven, which tend to snowball really quickly or impact the game very early. As an AD carry in the current state of the meta, you're not really enjoying the game. And this is from all the feedback I've been told by AD carry players, and from all the personal experience that I've seen playing the game. I think AD carry is in one of the worst positions ever, and the reasoning for that is because of this situation. The pacing in the game is poor, and I don't necessarily think what they're doing is going to fix this. So let's look at what they're doing. This is a very cursory glance. I've looked at it a little bit, and I'm not going to sure exactly how it's going to work out. But from what I understand, they're looking to extend laning phase by what looks like 14 minutes. So the barricades in the first tower, their shields in the first tower, you get gold for breaking them. It goes down to 15 at 14 minutes. And so it looks like they're going to increase laning to 14 minutes. And this doesn't change the problem of pacing. In my opinion, right now, all it does is it makes a shorter mid game, and then your late game just hits instantly. And this along top of the fact that Scuttle Crab still exists in the game, and mid lane and top lane and bot lane are literally built to play around your jungle right now, that I feel like the game is still going to stay the same. It's just going to elongate the laning phase. And then your late game is still going to be, can you Baron dance into like Nexus, or into an inhibit snowballs into Nexus. I hope to see more changes that will help in this regard. I know they've done some things here and there, and I have not fully looked at all the preseason stuff, but that's probably the biggest thing that I am looking forward to be changed, because I think right now the state of the game has that as the biggest problem. Let's talk about another thing. So next season, they're going to be split up the rank seasons. One great fucking idea. Super good. Because the way that rank works is that there is a very high amount of players at the very beginning and the very end. So when the season's ending, people want to get their rewards, they start playing more. When the season's beginning, people are really hyped about rank, they start playing a lot. There's a big trough in the middle. And that trough exists because, hey, there's no incentive to play. There's really not. You play one game a week, cool. And I think that one of the things that would be really nice is that there needs to be rewards. Maybe not needs, but there'd be nice to have in-game rewards for playing a lot. Now, I think that there's going to be individual rewards for seasons. There's going to be 3 seasons a year, and I think that that's very helpful. However, I think that like if there's additional rewards, there'll be 3 splits. Let's say we discount preseason. So preseason is usually about 2.5 months to 3 months at the end of the year. So the 3 splits will be 3 months each. I think that there should be more incentives for you to play ranked. Maybe not so much like, hey, you know, just borders, which are disappearing now. I want there to be like actual incentives, you know, maybe even small amounts of RP, small amount like blue essence, whatever, to be able to play ranked, to encourage people to play the game more. I think that it's been needed for a while, and I think this kind of reward system makes it so these trots don't exist. I think because there's going to be so many splits, there's going to be a lot of people activity at the start and the beginning of each, which means there will only really be a trot in like the middle month of each of the 3 splits. But I think that it could be better, and I encourage Riot to try to find a way to reward players that are playing ranked a lot. Because I think you want people to be playing ranked a lot, and if there are more rewards, people will take it more seriously, in my opinion. Positional queuing is also coming in ranked, and I am not sure if this is gonna work. I think it's really good in theory, so in ideal this is a great idea, but I'm not sure how effective it'll be. It's something where I've looked at, and I still am not sure how effective it's going to be. I have to wait and see. I just can't say. Overall though, these are my thoughts on the video. I hope you liked it. Please tell me if you enjoyed the video or what you'd like to see from me next. Thank you guys. I'll see you guys next time.